the U.S. Congress? Why is the Pentagon? Why is it so focused on the war, giving massive military grants? And why is there almost no talk of peace negotiations from official sources? My theory is that the Pentagon and also UK and other parts of NATO and the Five Eyes see that Russia is trapped in Ukraine and American military hardware, and according to the New York Times, the CIA is helping to quarterback things out of Kiev. It's sort of like they've got the Russian bear in a leg hold trap, and they're using modern American weapons to grind down Russia militarily, burn out its equipment, hurt its economy, harm Putin democratically. So they don't really want peace because they are degrading Russia's military so substantially, and perhaps even in a way that caught Russia by surprise. That's my theory. There's sort of fighting to the last Ukrainian. I mean, Ukraine is the punching bag, but it's Russian casualties are the NATO goal. That's my theory. I don't know what you think about that. And I wonder if that's a premonition for what the U.S. might do, God forbid, if China were to make a move on Taiwan. Obviously, the difference is Taiwan is an island that could be embargoed, whereas Ukraine can be, supplied by land. Maybe I'm wandering too much into speculation here or wandering off the subject, but I wonder if what NATO and America are doing in Ukraine is and insofar as it may have shocked Putin, I wonder if there's any lesson there for China and its ambitions.
I think the lesson that China takes is very different from what we think. The Western narrative is that the heroic resistance of Ukraine has made China think twice about invading Taiwan. That's what we would like to believe. I think, though, that China sees something very different, and that is the failure of the West to deter Russia from invading Ukraine. You've got to remember that last year, the coalition that was arrayed against Russia, the United States, 27 nations of the European Union, and Great Britain, had an economy that was 25.1 times larger than Russia's. And yet we absolutely failed to maintain peace in Ukraine. And I think that China looks at that and says that the West is feeble, it's incapable, and so therefore Beijing has latitude to do what it wants. Also, they see the sanctions regime on Russia, and the sanctions regime hasn't stopped the Russian war machine. Mm-hmm. So Beijing probably believes that any sanctions imposed on China for invading Taiwan or something else are not going to really affect Beijing's ability to accomplish its military objectives.
Yeah, I think that touches on something you and I discussed last time we met, which was if Western Europe couldn't get off of Russian oil and gas, like if they refused to sanction their own lifeline of energy from Russia, how could they possibly sanction China, which is so dominant in everything from electronics to, there's almost no field of vendetta. Pharmaceuticals, 90% plus of our medicine is made in China. So many, our gadgets are made in China. If you can't sanction Russia for natural gas, you're never going to sanction China for everything in the economy. I think you're right. That's probably the lesson they're saying, which is sanctions are more PR than bite, more bark than bite.
Yes, well, I believe that that's what Beijing, in fact, thinks. Now, we could talk all day about whether Beijing is right about that, mm-hmm. because this is a complicated issue about the effect of sanctions and how they work. But that's the lesson that I believe that Beijing has taken away. And that's a very dangerous lesson because deterrence has already been breaking down. It was breaking down, we saw in March of last year when China sent its top 2 diplomats to Anchorage to talk to our top 2 diplomats. And China, in that open public session on the first day, actually said, well, look, the U.S. can no longer talk to China from a position of strength. That was chilling. But since then, we've seen the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the failure of deterrence in Ukraine, and I believe that Beijing is looking at the world and thinking about what it can get away with.
Right. Let me ask you this. You mentioned perhaps some of the bubbles in China's economy are shrinking, the real estate bubble, some of the banking issues. I think that a lot of China's strength was its promise, its growth. lifting up hundreds of millions of people from poverty to the middle class. I mean, just think about all the construction. Think about all the infrastructure. Like it's such a promise. China's promise is this enormous market that will move from poor to middle class. But a lot of that is based on hope and confidence and projections. I mean, it's a very large country now, but it has quite a long ways to go. Perhaps if it had an existential conflict with the West that caused, if not actual sanctions, but caused a breaking of the psychological, emotional connection between China and the West, that the West no longer thought of China as a partner or a place to invest or a place to grow. Maybe just the loss of confidence that China had unfettered access to the West, maybe that would cause collapse because it's still, it's more promise than actual economic success. Again, I'm speculating here. I'm outside my area of expertise. I guess what I'm saying is Russia already had a number of collapses. It's shrunk in the world, and you can't really shrink oil and gas. That's a global commodity. People are always going to want it. But a lot of China's strength is the prospect of a million new skyscrapers, the prospect of new rail and airlines, and that prospect depends on continued access to Western markets and capital. Is there anything to that speculative theory?
I think what's occurring right now is that psychological change that you're talking about. We're starting to see companies withdraw from China, starting to build production facilities elsewhere so they're not so dependent on factories on Chinese soil. And there's been a reassessment of China's role in the world. So these are not working to the benefit of the Communist Party. We are seeing, I think, very different attitudes. And, one thing that has triggered this, we were just talking about Ukraine, is China's full-throated support for the Russian war effort in Eastern Europe. That is something that has forced people in countries and companies and, and barbershops to just see China in a very different light.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday, I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.